Good afternoon. Welcome back to FRC Media. I'm Keith Tebow. As you know, we have been over the past few weeks speaking with the candidates running for the 4th Congressional District seat, a seat which one of these candidates will hope to succeed, Congressman Joseph Kennedy. And we're pleased to be joined now by another one of the Democrats running in the race, one of 9 Democrats, Jake Auchincloss. Jake, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on. It's nice to be here.
Let me just ask you, for some people who may not know who you are, and that's a good case probably in the southern part of the district. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to run for the Congress seat.
Yeah, I am a city councilor in Newton. I'm formerly a Marine officer, and I'm recently a new dad. And I'm someone who has gotten results in the military, in business, in local government. I'm running for Congress in the most consequential period of our life to get results for the people of the Massachusetts 4th. I have been proud to earn the support of titans of the South Coast like Representative Carol Fiola, Representative Paul Schmid, Representative Pat Haddad. And I've done that by demonstrating partnership and demonstrating that I'm somebody who will work together with state and local officials to make progress on healthcare, to make progress on infrastructure investments, to make sure that we do not cut education funding and that our kids have the opportunities they deserve in life.
There's going to be a number of issues we're going to be discussing over the next half hour or so. But is there one issue that you're really passionate about and that may have been one of the determining factors on why you're running?
This president has damaged our country in ways both substantively and symbolically. He has eviscerated some of our core beliefs as a nation about our equal justice for all, equal opportunity for all. And it's going to be incumbent on my generation to restore the social contract in this country, to make Americans believe again in government, and to recommit ourselves to the great aspirations of this country, that the circumstances of your birth should not determine the condition of your life. I am animated more than by any single one issue by the great project before us of healing this country, of fighting back against Donald Trump's hateful agenda, and by making sure that the 2020s will be a time of rebirth and renewal for this country, where we move past the mistakes of the last 4 years.
You know, one of the items that has come up, in the past, it's been almost 2 months now, was the killing of George Floyd and the racial separation that appears within our country. I know as a Newton City Councilor, you mentioned you're a Newton City Councilor. I believe a vote has come up about defunding the police. What were your thoughts about that as a City Councilor? What do you think about it in general? And I guess your thoughts on any police reforms that may be needed.
I'm the chair of public safety, in fact, in Newton. And so I've been hands-on with this issue for a while now. And the first place I start here is a commitment to racial justice and a recognition that we as a country have still so far to go to ensure that regardless of the color of your skin, you are treated fairly by your fellow citizens, and you're treated fairly by law enforcement, and you're treated fairly by the institutions of governance. And this extends beyond police. We have seen recently reports of racial bias in the rental housing industry. We know that it exists across many of the sectors of our life. It's systemic. And so we in Newton are embarked on a great project to rethink public safety through the lens of racial justice. It is a commitment that's going to take an inclusive project, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take sustained dialogue. But we're starting it. I'm proud to have helped quarterback it. I'm proud that we, during budget season, began the process of rethinking public safety by transferring some funds from the police department towards extending library hours and towards funding the task force that's going to re-examine public safety. I think the term defund the police is perhaps a narrower term than what we should be thinking. We should be thinking about reinventing our conception of public safety. We want all of our civil servants across all functions to have the tools and the training they need to be successful and to be able to interact with constituents safely and respectfully. And I think that's going to require starting from the bottom up and thinking about these challenges with a new light.
As our region, our state, our country continues to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, what are your thoughts in terms of how the federal government has handled it, as well as in general, how we can learn from what we've all been going through to help improve healthcare in our country?
A pandemic is exactly the right time to make sure that healthcare is finally a human right, not a job perk. This administration's response to COVID has been marked by staggering incompetence, and it has literally killed people in this country. It did not need to happen. Other developed economies, from Germany to South Korea to Taiwan, were able to respond in a far more coherent and effective manner than the United States was. And it's because the arms of the federal government were not able to work together, and they were deeply politicized by this president's temper tantrums, frankly. He's ignored scientists and instead put forward his own agenda, his own re-election ambitions ahead of the public health of the country. And we need, as a country, to recommit ourselves to the public health of all citizens. That's going to require that we listen to science and not be swayed by politics. It's going to require that Congress step up its oversight of the administrative functions of public health, from the National Security Pandemic Preparedness Council to Health and Human Services, to the infrastructure for testing and contact tracing. And it's going to require that members of Congress serve as a bridge between the next president and the governor of Massachusetts, so that there's far better collaboration and far less miscommunication about the response.
Now, in terms of health insurance, are you in favor of Medicare for all, a public option? Where do you fall on that?
I think healthcare is a human right. And I think that the best way to get there is to build on the success of Obamacare, a law that was put in place 10 years ago, a law that has a strong foundation and that has been successful in extending coverage to millions of Americans, but that has been thwarted at every turn at the state level by Republicans in state legislatures and in governors' mansions. We need to introduce a public option. We need to fix some of the premium hike and reinsurance challenges of the existing law. But fundamentally, President Obama put forward a good law. It never was able to be manifested to its full success. And we now need to double down under President Biden and let Obamacare become the law it was intended to be, by introducing a public option, by strengthening the individual mandate, and by putting downward pressure on prescription drug prices for senior citizens especially.
You know, a lot of the Democratic candidates have been talking about making sure that we help those that may have been disadvantaged, those on the lower end of the economic scale. And I'll ask a specific question in a moment about income inequality. But I want to get into now education. You know, there are a lot of disparities in our educational system. There's been talk in some states where some states are actually taking more of an active role in providing funds for college education at public higher education institutions. As one of 435 congressmen, how would you see a path forward for education in general, both K through 12 and also higher education?
I mean, this is an issue that's close to my heart. The very first position I ever took when I was first running for the city council in Newton was full-day kindergarten and expanding our pre-K offerings. And I'm proud to say we made progress on both those issues in the city. We know that education is the pathway to prosperity and a pathway to a better life for kids. We have got to invest in it to the full measure of its potential, and especially at those crucial early years between the ages of 0 and 8. The research is quite compelling. If you get to third grade with a strong foundation of literacy and numeracy, you're set up very well in life. But unfortunately, as a country, we're falling short there. And increased investment for early education for kids and increased support for local school budgets, especially in this downturn, are going to be crucial to make sure that our kids are not giving up another year of education, and our school budgets are not losing a dime that they so desperately need to provide the core service of government.
So are you in favor of another CARES Act, if you will, that will help out local governments and state governments recover from some of the lost revenue that they've had over the past 12, 13 weeks?
Yeah, one of my top priorities is to secure federal relief for state and local budgets. I'm on the city council. I have seen the impending fiscal tightening that's going to come up. It's going to reduce programming for schools. It's going to reduce programming for senior services. It's going to reduce infrastructure developments. Taunton has recently laid off a number of teachers. I've been speaking to the mayor of Fall River as well as State Representative Carol Fiola, and I know well the challenges that Fall River is facing across a whole host of essential services. Unless the federal government provides some support for local governments, which cannot issue debt like the federal government can, citizens are going to face a much diminished capacity from their first line of government. And to me, that's unacceptable. We've already asked people to sacrifice a huge amount this last year.
And finally, getting back to the higher ed piece of the puzzle, are you in favor of having either federal or state governments provide free higher education for those? There's talk of not only K through 12, but K through 16, which would include a bachelor's degree. Are you in favor of more public support to support that?
I support Vice President Biden's position on this, which is that I think we can start with community college and associate's degrees, expanding taxpayer subsidies for kids to go to school there, but fully subsidizing relatively wealthy students' four-year liberal arts degrees, I don't think is the highest impact on a per dollar basis for this country right now. Like I said, we still have great gaps in our early education provisioning for this country. We still have a situation where 1 in 5 American kids is food insecure, and yet this president is cutting SNAP benefits. So we have a lot of work to do in education where I think the dollars can be better directed than in providing fully taxpayer subsidized four-year liberal arts degrees for even kids who are coming from pretty wealthy families, in fact.
And speaking of those wealthy families, prior to COVID-19 hitting us, the economy was moving along very well. Unemployment was low. The pandemic had hit, and obviously things have changed, rebounding in some aspects. But even prior to COVID-19, there was still a wide gap between those at the top of the income scale and those at the bottom. How do you foresee, as a congressman, trying to shorten that gap between those two wage earners, if you will?
It's a multi-pronged problem, and part of it comes back to education, as we were discussing. Also, part of it comes back to infrastructure investments, specifically in transportation, which can link together different regions of Massachusetts into one labor economy that's going to lift all boats. But this isn't just something that I've been talking about. This is something I'm actively working on. I recently wrote an op-ed with State Representative John Santiago that was in part informed by conversations I've been having with Representative Carol Fiola about the prospects for life sciences manufacturing in this state. Some folks may remember that in the last Great Recession, Governor Patrick launched the Life Sciences Initiative, which was his initiative to pull Massachusetts out of the Great Recession by doubling down on our strength in life sciences R&D, and it worked. It worked. We created a great cluster of R&D and an economic engine in Boston and Cambridge. Well, we're in a recession again, and I think we've got to lean back on our strengths again, but this time do it in a way that does not just create jobs in Boston and Cambridge, but lean into life sciences manufacturing, where there's tremendous demand for both small molecule and large molecule manufacturing, and that it can create jobs throughout the Commonwealth, specifically in the South Coast, in places like Fall River and Taunton.
And Fall River has that life sciences location in the far north end, which would be part of this district, and that would probably tie in well to what you're talking about here. What about in terms of income inequality? Are there ways for you to look at possibly changing our tax code again to tax more of those in the upper levels?
Well, the number one thing is to undo the Trump tax cuts, which were irresponsible in a booming economy and are downright disastrous in a weak economy. They were giveaways to corporations and to the uber wealthy, and they're just not appropriate. They weren't appropriate then, and they're certainly not appropriate now. So we've got to undo that. And we do need a more progressive tax code. We need to make sure that those who have done tremendously well in life, and I think that's great. If you earned a good income and you've had success, that's good for you. But it's important that you also make sure that other people's kids have a strong start in life too, that every kid has access to opportunity, and a more progressive tax code will do that.
As we head, into the 20th century, a lot more is being made about climate change. I know that's one of the platforms as well that you have talked about. Are you in favor of the Green New Deal, and how do we deal with changes in our climate?
Yeah, I was the first candidate in this race to call for a carbon tax. And I think a carbon tax is the single most important thing that we can do as a country to make progress on our goals towards curbing the pollution that causes climate change. We have a situation right now as an economy where we make it free to emit carbon, and yet through the payroll tax, we make it expensive to hire people. Well, in a time when we have a crisis with climate change and a crisis with a weak economy, it seems to me like we should switch those scenarios, make it cheaper to hire people by lowering the payroll tax, but make it more expensive to emit carbon by introducing a carbon tax. I think doing those two things is not only good for the climate, good for the economy, it also increases the chance that we can have a bipartisan bill in Congress to actually make progress on the environment, which is so far stalled.
I know one of the items in relation to that has been transportation projects like South Coast Rail. In Fall River, we've heard about this for quite a while now, getting rail from Boston back down to Fall River and the New Bedford area. How do you tie those two together? And is there a way for the Commonwealth to do it in a way that is clean and beneficial to the environment?
They're inextricably tied together. 40% of the carbon emissions that drive climate change in this state come from the transportation sector. So if we're talking about a Green New Deal, if we're talking about environmental policy in general, and we're not talking about transportation, then we're missing the point. And in fact, I published a comprehensive transportation plan when I was first announced as a candidate last fall. It calls for a new Eisenhower plan for this country, not for highways, but for public transportation, for all electric regional rail, for bus rapid transit, for really knitting together this Commonwealth into one reliable, convenient, safe public transportation network. And it can be done. It's been done in other world-class cities throughout the world, from Copenhagen to Amsterdam to Seoul to Seattle. This is not something that's insurmountable for Boston and for the South Coast. It just requires political will, and it requires collaboration between the private and the public sectors.
I want to spend a few moments now on the campaign itself. With COVID-19, the traditional form of campaigning, meeting people in person, has changed. This is a big time of the year during the summer. You're normally able to go to festivals and large events where you can meet a large group of people. How different has it been for you to campaign during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, it's not how we drew it up in the fall. I'll certainly say that. When I first ran for the city council in Newton, I got elected by knocking 15,000 doors and having thousands of one-on-one conversations with voters. It's quite simply the best way to campaign. There's just nothing like it, making that one-on-one connection with a future constituent. And it's a great disappointment of mine that that's not possible. There's no way around it. However, we take public health very seriously on this campaign, and it's just not responsible to go door to door in this environment. So we are trying every other means digitally. We are doing phone calls, text messages, we're doing TV ads, we're doing mail. We're going to talk to voters in every single way that they'll listen. And we're going to get a message out that I am the right candidate to rebuild our social contract as a country, that as a former Marine, as a current Newton City Councilor, I'm somebody who has the breadth of experience and the credentials to stand up to this president's hateful agenda and to rebuild and heal this country.
Since COVID, have you been able to come to Fall River at all to talk to people? I know you mentioned your endorsement from some of the local state representatives, but have you been down here much? And what have you seen about Fall River?
Absolutely. In fact, I was down just last week, and I was there for the Memorial Day car parade at the invitation of Carol Fiola and Paul Schmid. I've been speaking with Mayor Coogan relatively frequently, a great admirer of his. I think he's done a fantastic job for the city. He's someone I'd want to work closely with as a member of Congress because the most effective way that a member of Congress can operate is by being a facilitator, a convener, and a partner to local and state officials who are on the ground seeing the challenges and opportunities ahead of them. And when you've got people like Carol and Paul and Paul Schmid on the ground, I mean, listening is the first order of the day, because they really understand their constituents, and they're the ones who are going to be the on the ground champions. So I've started building those relationships already in Fall River. I'm continuing to have those conversations, and the people of Fall River can count on me being a member of Congress who shows up day in, day out to make sure the South Coast is no longer overlooked or left behind by Washington.
You know, as we head closer to the September 1st state primary, the legislature has passed and the governor has signed a bill which will make it easier for people to vote, primarily by mail, coming up for both the primary and the general election. What are your thoughts about that, making sure people have more access to more opportunity to vote?
Yeah, I've been a strong supporter of vote by mail. It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do in a pandemic, but really it's actually just the right thing to do, period. Vote by mail is a way to increase turnout. It's also a way to combat this president and the Republican Party's efforts at circumventing turnout at places where they think they're going to lose through voter suppression tactics. I think vote by mail is an important element of supporting our electoral integrity.
Now, when people go to the polls, a lot of the domestic issues which we've brought up seem to be important for people. However, as a member of Congress, you're also going to be voting on some foreign policy issues. You were a Marine Corps member. You served in the military not too long ago. How do you take that experience into your philosophy of how foreign policy should be handled here in the country?
Absolutely. As an officer in the Marines, I commanded a platoon in Afghanistan and I commanded a platoon in Panama. And I was able to see two different examples, one in which American foreign policy was a failure and one in which American foreign policy was a success. In Panama, to start with the success, I commanded a special operations unit that embedded with host country Panamanian forces, and we trained them how to do drug interdiction. And then we left after 1 month. And they're still doing those. So it was kind of a teach a man to fish versus fish for the guy mentality. It's a very effective way to leverage American military capabilities. It's effective in terms of reducing the cost to the American taxpayer. It's an effective in terms of reducing exposure of American lives overseas. And yet we got the mission done. In Afghanistan, I was part of what is now a 2-decade effort to police a 1,500-year-old sectarian conflict. And it's not working. The U.S. Inspector General said simply that the American people have, quote, constantly been lied to when it comes to Afghanistan. And on the ground in 2012, those lies were plain to see. We need to end the forever wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. We need to bring home the $6 trillion that we've spent over the last 20 years and prevent ourselves from spending another $6 trillion over the next 2 decades, and instead invest in healthcare and education and infrastructure for this country.
One of the other things that has come up quite often, I'm sure you've heard it since you've been running for Congress, is not only the domestic issues that are of concern of people, but maybe even more so the partisanship that has taken over many levels of government. We don't see it as much here in Massachusetts. Our legislature, our governor get along very well in working toward bipartisan solutions. In Washington, it seems that it's otherwise, very partisan. How, as one of 435 House members, can you help defray that partisanship and get people to work together?
I think there are some issues where partisanship is unfortunately necessary because there are values at stake. I feel that way, for example, about climate change. I feel that way about immigration, issues where I think this president and the Republican Party are really acting contrary to the character of this country or acting contrary to the long-term best interest of this country. And we do need to fight for what we believe in. There are other issues, though, where I agree that we can get some bipartisan consensus building. And there are caucuses, most especially the Four Country Caucus, which is a group of Democrats and Republicans, all veterans, who have agreed to work together on some really challenging issues, for example, COVID relief, where I would be honored to be a part of that effort, where I could create some of the political oxygen in the room for a more civil discourse and a more solution-oriented discourse. I'd be honored to be a part of that and be a champion for the principles that I believe in, but also be someone who can be constructive.
Have you thought about any other committees you may want to work on if elected?
Well, this current congressman is a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. That's a tough committee to get on as a freshman, but I would certainly strive for it because it's a very influential committee. It's one where I would have a strong ability to help create jobs in Massachusetts, and that's a key priority of mine.
As you continue to campaign, and I've brought this up with all of the candidates thus far, the 9 of you on the Democratic side primarily reside in 3 locations: Brookline, Newton, where you reside, and Wellesley. There's no representation in terms of those on the ballot from the southern part of the district. You're going to be splitting up all those votes in that area. How do you guard against any disconnect from voters down in the southern part of the district from saying, well, they're in the wealthy suburbs of Boston. They've got more money. They don't connect with me down here in Fall River.
Yeah, you used a term there isn't going to be any representation, and I would contest that premise. There is going to be representation from the South Coast. I'm going to show up for the South Coast day in, day out. I got to prove that to the constituents of the South Coast. but I will. That's my pledge to all those listening right now, is that while I may not have been born in Fall River, I am somebody who has Fall River's best interests at heart. That's how I've been able to earn the support I've been able to earn in Fall River from State Representatives Paul Schmidt and Carol Fiola. And they can rest assured that I will be committed day in, day out to creating good jobs and to having a green economic recovery where no one is left behind.
And in some ways, if the 9 of you split a lot of those votes up north, the South is really going to be where this is going to be won, correct?
Well, I'm not going to strategize. I'll leave it to the journalists to do the horse race stuff. We're focused in on talking to every voter that we can, because this thing is going to be won, I think, by hundreds, not thousands of votes.
Yeah, should be interesting. All right, Jake, one final question. Where can people find out more about your campaign, and what would you like to say to the voters of Fall River?
Well, I appreciate you having me on. Folks can find out more about me at jake4ma.com. It's my website. And I'm a member, I'm a future member of Congress who's going to show up day in, day out for the constituents of Fall River to ensure that we create jobs, that we have strong local government that can provide essential services, and that we have a green economic recovery.
All right, Jake Auchincloss, one of 9 Democrats running for the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District. Thank you for your time today. Best of luck, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
I appreciate it. Be well.
And I want to thank you for joining us today, as well as we are continuing our conversation with the candidates running in the 9th District. I'm Keith Tebow. Have a great day.